Hey there, my name's Rod Yates and you're listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. This is where I talk to music creators and music industry professionals about their lives and careers, the ups and downs of their journey and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is Snow Patrol frontman Gary Lightbody. What do you do when you've spent your whole adult life striving to become a successful musician, and then when you finally reach that breakthrough, you discover that success still doesn't fix that creeping sadness you've felt since you were a kid? That was the situation Gary found himself in when hits such as Run and Chasing Cars took Snow Patrol to the top of the charts and into some of the biggest venues in the world. In this conversation, Gary talks really openly about that struggle and how he's managed to, in his words, become great friends with his demons. We also talk about what it was like growing up in Bangor in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, the impact Nirvana had on him as a kid, his journey to sobriety and how his father's battle with dementia has affected him, and much, much more. I met Gary while he was in Sydney in August during Snow Patrol's acoustic tour of Australia. And what you're about to hear is a really open and honest conversation about life and all its ups and downs. We started by talking about the first gig Gary ever went to.
1991 in Belfast, the Ulster Hall, Red Hot Chili Peppers supported by Rollins Band. Oof. And so Rollins Band were the first band I ever saw live, and it was transformative. It really was extraordinary. Red Hot Chili Peppers were brilliant, and any band that came to Belfast in those days, in the sort of early 90s, before the end of, but there was hardly any touring bands that would come in the 80s. It was just too, people just thought it was too dangerous to come. But in the 90s, international acts started to come to Belfast, and in 91 I saw the Chili Peppers, and in 92 I saw Nirvana, and Nirvana brought the Breeders and Teenage Fan Club with them. So the first 5 bands I saw were Rollins Band, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Teenage Fan Club, The Breeders, and Nirvana. It's not a bad run for that's 5 out of 5 classic, like genius artists. And yeah, the first gig was amazing. The Belfast crowds were, back then and still, Northern Irish crowds are, sort of renowned for being. We didn't get that many gigs, you know what I mean? We're only now starting to become like a regular pit stop on the international circuit. So when bands come there, it still means an awful lot, and it certainly meant an awful lot to us then. Yeah. I will forever love the Red Hot Chili Peppers because they came to Belfast. And Nirvana, of course, are part of the reason why I'm sitting here now talking to you.
Yeah, and you said Rollins Band was transformative. In what way?
Yeah, Henry Rollins just stood at the front of the stage with his, sort of his standard issue clothing, which was no clothing. He looked like the Hulk, after he'd went from Banner into the Hulk. Like the shorts were just ripped sort of cargo shorts, and just no top on, with covered in tattoos. The Hulk doesn't have tattoos, but and he had the Search and Destroy tattoo on his on his back, and it was. He just stood at the front, and I think Belfast was still at that time, and was for many years a kind of a punk stronghold. Like some of the only gigs that were happening in the kind of the smaller venues in Belfast were kind of punk gigs, and so there was most of the front row were spitting at him. It was something like a mark of respect
back then, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think he saw it. He certainly did not see it like that. He said, the next person to spit at me, I'm coming down there, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. And nobody else spat the whole gig. Everybody was utterly terrified of him, including me. And it was really a sight to behold.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind.
Yeah, and you mentioned that not many bands came through Northern Ireland at that point because, clearly, I presume, because of the Troubles at that point. And you've spoken about growing up around that time in Bangor. What did you see on the streets on an average day?
Like people will from Northern Ireland will know well that Bangor wasn't really touched that much by the Troubles specifically. I think there was one bomb in Bangor in my lifetime, but there was a lot of violence on the streets in Bangor at the weekends, especially. Friday and Saturday nights, there was a lot of fighting, which I didn't really know about until I was in my teenage years and trying to get into pubs. And then like when the pubs chucked out, which back then there was a kind of wasn't so much a curfew as like just a time. Everything, clubs, pubs, bars, everything closed at. They had to be shut at 1 o'clock, and everybody gets thrown. It was a really stupid idea because everybody ends up on the streets at the same time, at the same level of drunkenness, and with that level of drunkenness, some people get sleepy, other people get violent, and. It's the people that were getting violent were had plenty of people to kick against, and you would literally be going to the pizza shop and like avoiding punches being thrown and ducking down. And yeah, it was like a western, kind of like the trick. The guy's still playing the piano in the corner, and there's chairs being smashed against the walls and stuff. But that's not Bangor. That's not Northern Ireland. That's not really happening. Sort of en masse anymore. There's obviously violence in Northern Ireland, just as there is in every country. But it's not anything like the way it was. It's a completely different place now.
Yeah. Did the Troubles affect you as a kid?
Yeah. I mean, I think from I was 12 going to school in Belfast, like getting the bus up to school in Belfast, or getting sort of the car up with my one of my friends' dads drove us up quite a lot, and you'd be stuck behind. Seemed to be most days. That's just maybe my memory, adding them all together in the same spot. But you'd be stuck behind the sort of the armored, army cars and armored police cars and stuff like that with soldiers. Sitting out with the open doors in the back and the soldiers pointing their guns out, in the back of the car, and you're like, what is, even seeing it on you've seen it on the news every day, seeing it, like being very aware that it's happening, you're thinking, where are we living? It's insane.
Did you think most places were like this? This is just normal?
I know I'm not not as afraid as I should be of guns, so I've definitely been desensitized to it. Like I see, sometimes you see police like heavy carrying in like London and the underground or something like that, and I don't really blink an eye, and there's people kind of like looking as like they've they're shitting themselves. And I'm just okay, that's just my childhood, but it's it was a very, very strange and kind of dark time. I think it affected me in that I wanted to get away. I wanted to get away somewhere else. As a kid, I had a very love-hate sort of relationship with Northern Ireland at that time. I love Northern Ireland so much now.
What was it like for your parents, do you think, sending you off to school, knowing that that's what you were seeing on the way to school?
Well, my mum and dad grew up in Derry, Londonderry. It was always Derry to us, but right. I'm from a Protestant background. I'm not religious anymore, but I think the standard thing would be that from a Protestant background you would call it Londonderry, and yet my family always called it Derry. So I don't know. I think our family were always a little sort of just laissez-faire with kind of rules like that. You know what I mean? It was like. My grandmother, it sort of all came from my grandmother, who's a really just extraordinarily open, friendly, welcoming person. She would have the Catholic priest round to her house for tea, as well as the Protestant reverend, right. and all and sundry would come round to Betty's house for a cup of tea and a scone. But she was kind of the matriarchal figure that sort of that kind of set the tone for our entire family. Right. that everybody was welcome, everybody was accepted. That we were. It's the way I've seen the world. It's the way I've seen life on Earth since then. It's always been from her sort of setting the example. Yeah,
nice. What did your parents do? What were their occupations?
My dad was in the civil service, and my mum worked so many different jobs. It's funny. My mum showed me. She was clearing out a bunch of stuff in the attic, and she showed me some bank statements that they had from the night from when I went to a good school that everybody else at my school, their parents were very wealthy. and my parents were not. Like, this is the type of school that on somebody's 17th birthday, people were driving in on like open top MGs and things like that. And I was like getting the bus to school or getting lifts from friends' dads. So our family were not rich at all. We always had food on the table and a roof over our heads, but my mum worked sort of 2-3 jobs at a time to kind of make up the deficit. And she showed me a bank statement, a number of bank statements over the years that I was at Campbell, and they were always in the minus column. Really?
And
I didn't know this until I was in my I didn't see the evidence until a few weeks ago when she showed me, but they had told me like we were. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can be bankrupt as an individual, but they were, they were on the breadline,
yeah.
And they were always kind of scratching their heads as to how they were going to make ends meet.
Okay.
But they'd never let on to us as kids. Never.
Right. Was there a lot of music in the house? Were they musical?
No, not really. It was there was a few records, a few vinyl records, and there was it was like mostly country music, Mo Bandy, Merle Haggard, Kenny Rogers. And my dad had a couple Elton John records, and my mum had a few Nana Muscuri records. And she looks identical to Nana Muscuri as well.
So were you confused as a kid?
Confused the hell out of me, yeah. I was like holding a record sleeve up going, like looking at my mum going, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Double life.
Right. And your dad has made his way into a couple of your songs. The one which I'm thinking of is Lightning, where you're singing about at some point you would like to have children, and I think your lyric is you'd like to be for them what I've had, a father like my dad. Have the two of you always had a good relationship?
Yes and no. He was always like he worked 9 to 5 or whatever, and like every day. So I would really only see him for dinner and at the weekends. And I think the things that he liked to do, I wasn't super into. I loved to fish with him. Like we would go fishing, and I loved playing football, and he would kick the ball around sometimes. But he liked shooting. I didn't like that much. And he liked working on the car, and I don't even drive a car still. I'm 43, so that's how little I like cars. So I think the things that he really were into, like our next door neighbor was like he was into cars and things like that, and he was my age. So my dad would very often be sort of working on the car, and he would sort of pop round and he'd be working on the car with my dad, and I would sort of feel slightly jealous of that, that sort of bond that they would have. Because I really, even though I was jealous of it, I really couldn't be arsed with it. Like I really just, it was the last thing I wanted to do. Yeah. I wanted to run around kicking football or just being a kid outdoors.
Yeah.
Not really interested in cars. But, and then over the years, I think when I started sort of getting older, our politics started to get in the way of our relationship, as a pinko liberal nut job according to him, and he was a conservative mental case according to me. These are not terms that I would use now for people, and I especially in these days, because I think that conversation is to be cherished, is to be nurtured, is to be lionized, because people are just shouting certain bad words at each other now, and it's getting in the way of progress. But in those teenage years, when you're trying to push against something, you're trying to kick against something, you're trying to maybe create your own identity as separate from your family or separate from your father. I guess it was pretty natural for that. I was pretty much my mum and my grandmother's sort of son and grandchild, and my dad kind of would always argue with me about. I mean, we had a classic argument about when Obama was going to be had the nomination, the Democratic nomination, and was running for president. he was for John McCain and I was for Obama, and there was some absolutely volatile arguments.
Yep.
And it was pretty brutal. And my mom was kind of like the referee in the middle, just trying to, well, not so much the referee as somebody just distraughtly trying to like distract us by any other conversation.
Right. But he's clearly someone who means a lot to you.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I was always trying to. I think even then, even in the arguments, I was trying to make him see my side. I was trying to make him hear me. I was trying to be seen by him, you know. And I think it was more like kind of out of love for him than it was out of, you know, being angry at him in a lot of ways. And then as time went on, I realized the benefit to our relationship that shutting the hell up and when those subjects came up was because our conversations would become expansive and really wonderful, and he would talk about his childhood, and these are things that I missed out on, like learning about my dad and learning about the way he grew up and learning about the man that he is truly and deeply, because I was always ready. I was always itching for a fight.
Right.
And as you know, I got to learn about that over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. It's changed our relationship, you know, remarkably. And it's you know, him and my mum are two people that worked their absolute butts off for me and my sister. You know, it's like they did everything so that we could have a good life.
Yeah. Another song which I guess is about your father is Soon, and his battling with dementia, which I imagine, I mean, that must be an incredibly special song to you.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, especially when you realize that, you know, the mind is finite, and you know, finite in even in the lifespan of the body. You know, it's like your mind very often just goes first, especially as we live longer and longer, and we have less time than we think. You know, somebody might live another 10 years, but he's not there the way he was anymore. And it's brutal. You know, it's brutal for my mum especially, who's been trying to hold the fort down in that sort of maelstrom for a long time. He's finally gone into, my mum couldn't look out. He kept falling over, and he's, I'm not going to say what weight he is, but he's heavier than my mum, a lot heavier, and she can't pick him up when he falls over. And so he had to go in. He's had to go into care, and you know, that was a big deal. You know, my mum is very sort of typical Irish mum, so she feels guilty that she can't look after him, and she's really hard on herself. Even though my sister are telling her that every day that you literally can't look after him anymore. This is where he needs to be. So it robs a lot more people than the person that's losing their mind, you know. And I feel for them both, you know.
Yeah,
it really is brutal. And my sister too, who's there all the time, and they're, you know, like in seeing him every day. And obviously, I'm away on tour, and they're the ones that are dealing with it every single day.
Yeah.
But he has moments of lucidity still, and he's still very, very funny. He's always been very funny. He is the life and soul of the party. He really is, because he used to, my mom, I was the teenager with the cool parents, in that, you know, like my mom and dad would say, we're going to have a party, then, you know, we're going to be there. I'm like, whoa. No, we'll be there. And like my dad would just pour drinks for people and make sure that everyone was having fun, but like nobody was having too much fun. And
right.
If anybody got, you know, at a line, the party would get shut down. It was like it wasn't like we just had a free for all.
Sure.
But you know, he would make sure that everybody, I think they were doing it, you know, making sure everybody was safe and everybody was cool. But I think all my friends love my parents. You know, And my dad's always been this guy that people seem to, like after a gig, my folks are there in Ireland, the table that has my mum and dad at it will just have, just be surrounded with people and they'll be telling stories.
Nice.
I'll probably not be coming off that well in those stories, but it is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. What was it like playing that song for your dad?
Well, by the time, we'd written and recorded it, he doesn't quite know, he wasn't able to understand, I think, that it was about him. So I don't think he's ever really heard it, even though he's heard it, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
I think it was harder for my mum hearing it. I played it live for the first time. I've played it a few times on this tour, actually, but we've only played it live as a full band once. And my mum and dad were in the audience. It was in Belfast. It was in the Ulster Hall. And we played it. And then after the song, my dad turned to my mum and said, "Who is that up there?" And she said, That's Gary. It's your son." And he went, "Oh yeah, I know that. I know that." And then 20 minutes later, he said again, "Who is that up there?" And she said, "It's Gary. It's your son." He said, "Oh yeah. So that's the stage that he was at then, which was a year ago, and now he's further down that line. So it's. I got to spend the day with him making the video for that song. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was one of the best days I've ever had with him, because we just looked at old pictures. He lights up when he sees old pictures, and that's what we're doing a lot, bringing sort of pictures and little videos and home videos and stuff into to the home that he's in, and we're just sort of, talk about art growing up and talk about life as it was, because he's not connected to life as it is. He's not remembering the day before. He doesn't remember that my mum's been in to see him, every day. Sometimes he thinks she's not been in for months. So I think the further back you go with somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's, the more connected they feel to it.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, writing that song for you, did that help you deal with what you were saying?
It's funny because it was written differently than any other song I've ever written. I wrote the lyrics first. It was a poem, which I've never turned a poem into a song. And I say poem, I don't have my poetry wouldn't hold up in poetry court.
But the lyrics are very poetic.
Well, thank you, but it doesn't have any structure, poetic, classic or standard poetic structure. But it's I kind of wasn't expecting it to be a song. I was just writing it for myself, really, to try and make sense of it.
After the break, Gary talks about the lean time Snow Patrol endured in their first 10 years, his short-lived job as a salesman, and what happened the first time he ever heard Nirvana. Welcome back to Humans of Music. I'm Rod Yates, and I'm talking to Gary Lightbody. Before he became a musician, Gary's first love was poetry, and we pick up the conversation talking about the life-changing moment he first heard Irish poet Seamus Heaney.
He's the reason why I started writing in the first place.
Yeah,
he's an extraordinary poet from Northern Ireland. Although I would probably think he would see himself as Irish. He grew up in Northern Ireland and then moved to Dublin, and so he's very much. I think the Irish people in general would consider him their poet, and rightly so. He is just an extraordinary. He was. He's not with us anymore, but an extraordinary man. And my English teacher when I was 14 started. It's part of the curriculum, but when he started reading Heaney, I switched on for the first time at school. I was like, what is happening?
Wow.
It just fired something in my brain. And I started writing poetry immediately. I think the first day that we did Heaney in school, I started writing poetry that night when I got home. And I was published when I was 15 a bunch of times. And it was poetry that I was that I was obsessed with. You know, I was obsessed with music, but I didn't know how to make music. I didn't know how to write music. You know, sort of. It is funny, I suppose, ironic that "Soon" was the first poem that I turned into a song, and yet poetry was the first thing that led me to music. You know, in the first place.
So when did you learn about the music side of things? Then when did you learn to write a song and to actually pick up a guitar and have a go?
It was around the same time, but it was poetry came first. But Nirvana, it was probably a year after that. 15. I was 15 when. 15 or 16 when Nevermind came out. I didn't know Bleach before then. It hadn't reached Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it had to some super cool people, but it hadn't reached me. It was my friend Mark Greenfield went to the record store at lunchtime at school with the day that Nevermind came out and bought it on tape. And then he'd somehow, before the end of school that day, had listened to the first side of the tape. I think he was just listening to it in class. And then the second side of the tape was ready to go in the school bus on the way home. And I sat beside him on the bus, and he gave me an ear. You know, back in those days, you had those big sort of orange headphones that were kind of, you could kind of turn if you sort of turned without snapping it, you could kind of turn one of them around. And I sort of sat up close to him and had this pressed against my ear, and he had one pressed against his ear. And Territorial Pissings came on. Come on, people, now smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try and love one another right now. And then it goes, gotta get away. And it just blew my fucking mind clean off. And I just was obsessed from that moment on. I was listening to metal up to then, really, just pretty much exclusively Iron Maiden, Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, and that just completely and utterly turned me into a different direction in my life. And then I just read every interview in the NME and the Melody Maker and any kind of magazine that Kurt Cobain did, and all the bands he liked, the Vaseline, Stage Fan Club, the Breeders, everything, Sonic Youth, everything he was talking about, I started to listen to, you know.
Right. And so when you end up going to university and starting Shrug, is that what's in your mind? That's what's in my mind.
My favorite band at that time when I was 18 was Sebado.
Okay.
Lou Barlow and Nirvana. And when I was 18, that was 1994, that was an insanely good year for music because Jeff Buckley's Grace came out, the first Superfly Animals album came out, Supergrass. It was just an amazing year for music. Oasis, definitely, maybe. It was a year that guitar music just went like, we're just gonna rule the world now. And it was also a terrible year for music. It started terribly because it started with Kurt's death, but the music that was released in the wake of that sort of really wasn't like, that was a catalyst for me sort of starting the band, you know.
Right.
It was it was sort of an extraordinary time in my life, and the day after I arrived at Dundee University, I met Mark McClelland. I was introduced to him by a mutual friend of ours. I went to Dundee University in Scotland, and I met somebody from Belfast, and we started a Northern Irish band in Scotland. And I met somebody else called Michael Morrison, who played the drums with us for a while, and the three of us were from Belfast. Well, I was from Bangor, but yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen that you've described yourself as an introverted kid growing up. How long did it take you to sort of come out of that introversion and actually be a frontman?
Oh, long time. Because I mean, we did our first gig within the first, I think, before the end of that year anyway, you know, well before we should have done our first gig.
Yeah.
And we played to like sort of 40 friends at the Students' Union in Dundee. And the one and only time there's been a broken bass string in Snow Patrol's entire history was that night, the very first gig. And as I played an impromptu cover of Evan Dando's Big Gay Heart, while Mark had to restring his guitar. So that was an eventful first gig.
Yep.
But I was staring at my feet the whole time. It wasn't. We weren't making classic shoegazing music, but I was gazing at my shoes for a long time, many years. And I always had a big red face. I was constantly embarrassed. I would be embarrassed by talking to a stranger, talking to a girl, anything that put me out of my comfort zone. I would have a big red face, and I can't imagine too many people were taking pictures of those gigs. But if there is any pictures of those gigs, you can guarantee that my face would be bright red.
So why would you become the front man?
I don't know. I guess it's because it's by default, really, because I guess I was writing the lyrics and I was writing the songs and I was singing the songs. I guess not all front men or women are, natural performers. I don't think, I'm not sure that many sort of rock or, sort of modern, let's say, music front men and women are natural front men and women. I think they learn as they go. There's very few Bonos in the world. By every report that I've read of the early life of U2, Bono was at 15 the consummate frontman.
Yeah.
That's probably not the case for that many bands. I
can't believe you weren't channeling your inner Rollins.
Yes, I know. But we were playing I think in those days, another great album, Fuzzy by Grantley Buffalo in 1994, we were playing kind of acoustic-ish music, Jeff Buckley inspired and Grantley Buffalo inspired kind of music. And it was by no means anywhere close to as good as that. Maybe not 1% as good as that. But it was was music that I didn't have to kind of sort of puff out my chest for. It was music I could sing from behind my fringe.
Yeah. And famously you changed your name to Polar Bear and then Snow Patrol and eventually put out a couple of records, and I guess it's very well known that for that first 10 years of your career there was critical success, but there wasn't a lot of commercial success. How lean were those years for you when you were trying to make it?
Well, extremely lean. We were sleeping on. We had a van that shouldn't have been on the road, that had holes in the floor. We were sleeping on the gear. Some nights we were just in the back of the van. We were asking people, the 20 people at our shows, every night if we could sleep on their floor, from the microphone.
Yeah,
I'd be like. Before the last song, I'd be like, would it be cool if maybe just if we could sleep on your floor? And people most of the time would just go, yeah, come on. And then we'd meet people that way. We'd go around and then, you'd have a beer or something like that. And then it would all be sort of curled up on their living room floor or whatever. And then we'd go in the morning, It was like, it was really kind of, it felt like you were sort of part of a community in some way, like there was like it felt like there was no. That's the thing we've always tried to maintain in a way. It's harder and harder when you're playing bigger and bigger places, but that there is no gap between the audience and the band. We don't want. That's why I talk to the crowd as much as I do, because I don't want them to feel like I am in their place and position. So many times I've been in it so many times. I know what the view looks like from there. It's like I want this to be a 360 kind of view of a gig, and everybody to feel like they're a part of it. But those times were I was sleeping on when I was back in Glasgow. We moved to Glasgow after Dundee, and I was sleeping we were either in a really shitty apartment that the heating didn't work, which is not good in Glasgow, and one of the places we were living had one burner on the cooker worked,
right,
and the shower was like taped on by gaff. This is when we moved in. You know what I mean? This is what we moved into. It wasn't like we destroyed the place. This was like this is what we could afford. And there was no heating, and but we were young, and those things mattered less. I guess we were made of elastic, I guess. And then I'd sort of sleep on friends' couches and things like that, and sleep in friends' spare rooms if they let me. And And it was 10 years of that. It was 10 years of people being very kind and charitable to us, you know, or else we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah. Did you have, at any point, any doubts during that? Or...
Oh, yeah, all the time, every day. Yeah. And we had a lot of people saying, why are you still doing this? And every time I would go home for Christmas or something like that and go to the pub to like see old school friends and stuff, some of them would say like things like, how's your wee band going? Or like, what, you know, you still doing that? Or like,
right.
You know, and you just feel like absolute shit.
Yeah.
So I think things like that had a spurring effect maybe on me. I was like, oh, I'm going to do this. Not to say fuck you to someone, that's not a reason to do anything. But like, this can't be the way this ends. You know, this can't be this way. It can't end in a kind of to borrow our first band name, a shrug. You know, it can't end in like this. Something has to happen. I didn't know what or how to make it happen, but.
And then when you get dropped as well, that presumably the voices get even louder.
Yeah, I think that was when I was working in a lot of bars because I could, for the most part, sort of choose my hours, and then if we went on tour, it wasn't the end of the world to get another job in a bar if I got fired, or most of the time they'd go, okay, fair enough, we'll give you 2 weeks off. But when we got dropped, I thought for the first time in my life I was like going to have to get a proper job, and I went to what do you call it? A job agency.
Right.
I don't think that's the word for it, but careers agency, something like that. And I got I did training for like an office job. I went, the first one I did was in a call center. And it lasted 1.5 days.
Wasn't for you?
No, I kept not meeting my quota for the hour. You know, that it was like done by hours. I was trying to sell people on the phone, which I'm not built for selling people anything. I was trying to sell them Film 4 when they already had 10 Sky movie channels, and I would end up sort of talking them out of it. You know, I would be like on the phone going and. They're like, do you want to Film 4? And they're like, what is Film 4? And I'm like, do you like Quentin Tarantino? And they're like, who? This isn't for you. This isn't for you. If you don't like, you've already got those 10 movie channels. You don't want this. And they're like, all right, cheers, mate. See ya.
You didn't last long. What a surprise!
It did not last long, no.
So when Final Straw comes out and Run is a hit, like, how did you unlock the keys to the kingdom? What changed?
Well, there was quite a few things that worked in our favor. We met Big Life Management, Jazz Summers, the late great Jazz Summers, who was the sort of the first big name in the music industry that had belief in us. And we had written Run, Chocolate, How to Be Dead, Spitting Games. All 4 songs would go on to be hits in the UK, but we hadn't had any success with getting anybody interested in them. In fact, our own publishing company, who had signed us a few years before, we brought those songs in, you know, Run being a song that ended up being a very big hit, and they said, no, we don't hear anything here. And
wow.
They offered us £5,000 to stay on, and we said, no, I think we're worth more than that. And we parted company with them. But then Jazz started taking those 4 songs around. They were demos, but they were decent enough demos around the record companies, and every record company said no because we'd been dropped by an indie. So why on earth are we trying to get signed by a major? We went around indies too, but everyone was like, "You're damaged goods. You know, we can't touch you guys." And then it was only because Jim Chancellor, the great Jim Chancellor, started work at Polydor, heading up a label called Black Line, which would become Fiction Records, or the second incarnation of Fiction Records. And he heard the demos and came up to see us in Glasgow, and he said we played him some songs in the rehearsal room, and then he took us for a much needed dinner. and we ate that day, and then afterwards, I just couldn't take it anymore. For anybody that's listening that's heard the story before, I apologize, but I have told it before. But it's the origin story of our love affair with Jim Chancellor. He said, I was always going to sign you guys. I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to come up here and make sure you weren't cunts. And which is the single greatest line I still think it is the single greatest line anyone's ever said to us. But he obviously didn't think we were cunts, and it was good. And we signed to Black Lion, very quickly became Fiction, and then Big Life had started managing a producer, DJ, sort of solo artist had become after his career in Compulsion, called Jackknife Lee.
Mm.
And they put me and Jackknife together in a room. Well, I went round to Jackknife studio, and it was like meeting a member of my family, a long lost family member. We just played. His studio was just full of vinyl, and we just played record after record, and like we were getting like it was the precursor to what modern life in music is, I guess. We were playing like 30 seconds of each song, and then just going, no, but what about this one? What about this one? There's records being piled on top of records, and we're getting really excited about working together, and then we've worked together ever since.
Yeah, nice.
That's been a 14-year love affair.
After the break, Gary opens up about his experiences with depression and the moment he knew he'd hit rock bottom. Welcome back to Humans of Music. I'm Rod Yates, and I'm talking to Gary Lightbody. After struggling for 10 years, Snow Patrol finally broke through with their 2003 album, Final Straw. But as Gary soon found out, success wasn't the miracle cure for the sadness and self-loathing he'd endured since childhood. I thought a really interesting quote from you as you were saying that after you had that success, that for the 10 years prior, you'd sort of been thinking if we only had a hit, then everything would be okay. But then you had that hit and you were struck by the realization that you still had this sort of self-loathing that you've talked about having since you were a kid. Like it didn't actually change how you were feeling inside.
No.
Which is a stark realization. Do you remember when that started to dawn on you?
Yeah, I think it was just moments, like we'd play, I think one of the first sort of biggest shows we did was Shepherd's Bush Empire, which I think 4 months before we'd played to like 10 people in an old strip club. And then Run was a massive hit. We kind of had this, as people have said, 10-year overnight success. And we started playing big shows, big for us, like they would get bigger, but at the time it was just exponentially huge. Playing the Shepherd's Bush Empire, an iconic venue in London, and I think when I came back to the hotel after that, when it all sort of settled down and the drink and various other things had worn off, I was just in tears and I didn't know why. And I think that happened a lot. I'd come back from gigs and be in the sort of silence of the hotel room and be sort of inconsolable. And it was just this highs and lows. I didn't realize it was because I, had depression. I just thought there was something wrong with me, And I'd had that, that sadness, that creeping, inexplainable, sadness since I was a kid. That I now know was depression. And it's I'd never really been able to label it. I don't think people in Northern Ireland ever really, certainly at that time, really talked about mental health or you just sort of, you'd be told to buck your ideas up. Get
right.
up, pick yourself up and stop being sad. It's like. That was therapy back then.
Yeah. But you're in this loop by that point. So you have success. So all of a sudden you have more pressures to do albums, more pressure to tour. which when you're feeling this way, that the fact that this success isn't actually fulfilling you after years of thinking it would, I imagine can become a bit of a dangerous cocktail, just this loop of doing all these things, but it never actually fulfilling you. Did it get...
Well, I mean, it's not that it never fulfilled me. It did, and there was a lot of fun that I had, a lot of good times, a lot of amazing things that I was present for. I don't mean physically present; I mean mentally present. But there was also this other side, that happened in the darkness, that happened in the aftermath of things, that happened in the silence. So it was very much. I don't think it was as extreme as bipolar disorder, but it was very much two sides to life. But there was a happy side to life for sure as well. It wasn't like sort of, as Bill Hicks says, I've done this show 300 times this year, so excuse me while I plaster on a fake smile and plow through this shit one more time. It wasn't, he was joking when he said that, kind of. But it wasn't that. It wasn't that I was plastering on a fake smile and plowing through this shit one more time. It was all real. It was all felt. It was all. My heart was in it. It's just that my heart was also in this other place at the same time. Or, it was like being in the upside down.
Right.
Let's put it in a modern context.
And what would get you through those moments? Because that happened for years. Just the happiness, the happy parts,
the happy parts, and drink and drugs. It's how a lot of musicians, it's how a lot of people in the the arts industry, or arts industry. What a misnomer, but the oxymoron, whatever. But the artistic, I don't know, whatever. Let's just say arts. Stop stumbling. It's how a lot of people deal with it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not the right way to deal with it, particularly. But like it was the only way that I knew at the time. Wasn't that there was nobody showing me in a different way. I guess it was that I wasn't really listening.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really take the time to listen to any other sort of alternatives.
Right, but you did start listening several years ago.
I did then, yeah. It was a people ask about why it took 7 years to make the last album, and there isn't much of an explanation other than that's just the length of time that it took, not just to make the next album, but to remake me.
Yeah.
me. It's like it was that was the time. I needed the 4 years before sobriety to get all of that out of my system, and then to get to the point where I was at my lowest ebb. And very often it is for people, a lot of people. I mean, it's I empathize, but I also really caution people to not let it get to that stage, where you are at your lowest. It's the only, you can't dig up. You're now in a hole that you can't get out of, and there's no way out by yourself. You have to call for help. Somebody has to send a rope down, and that's the hardest thing, I think. Especially for somebody like myself who wouldn't ask for help.
What did your lowest point look like?
Very, very sick. My whole head was infected.
Yeah.
I had sinus, ear, eye, nose. Everything was just rotten in there, which is gross. I know. Sorry to bring that up. I was flying to a few days. I was flying to go to the Euros to see Northern Ireland play in our first tournament in 30 years, and I was so excited about it. And I was doing my exercises, and I bent down to touch my toes, and I came back up again, and the whole room started spinning, and the floor underneath my feet was completely it was like going like waves, and I was in LA, so I thought, oh, it's an earthquake, and then it kept going, and I phoned a friend of mine that lived nearby. I said, "Are we having an earthquake?" And he went, "No," and I went, "Ah, shit." And I sort of told him my symptoms. He's like, I told a few of my friends with symptoms, and they're like, yeah, it sounds like vertigo. You should maybe go and get that checked out. And I went and got it checked out, and they did a CT scan, and that's when they found that I was basically rotten on the inside. And the guy was like, yeah, you can't. I was like, well, am I going to be okay to fly in like a week or whatever it was? And the guy's like, no, you're not. You have to stay here and you have to stop whatever it is you're doing. And I was like, and he wanted to operate on me and to clear it all out. And one of my best friends in the world is an acupuncturist, and she said, I said, is there any other way other than an operation? He said, no, there's not. There's no other way. And I phoned her, and she said, give me a month and go back and get another scan in a month. And I did acupuncture with her 3 days a week for a month and stopped drinking. And a month later, I went back for another scan, and I was completely clear. So anybody doesn't think acupuncture works, it's and that then just put me on the path. I just realized I'd given up drink before, but I'd never really been scared. You know, I just was like, oh, I should do. You know, this is like something I should do. You know, it's like this is something I had to do. It felt different this time.
Yeah,
and then ever since, any time I've thought about drinking, I've thought about hangovers immediately. It's like my body has went, or my mind has went, I'm going to set like a safety switch that every time you think about drinking, you're going to think about the last hangover that you had.
Right.
And the fact that it lasted 2 days.
Wow.
And that you're too old now to have a hangover and actually function anymore. It is an incredible, it's an incredible sort of safety valve to have.
Yeah.
And I don't think about drinking that much anymore anyway.
Okay.
Sometimes if I'm watching, I don't watch Mad Men anymore, but I did do, but a show like that where there's a lot of drinking in it.
Yep.
You go, oh yeah, that looks good. Those guys are really throwing that down, and look, they're all functioning perfectly well. Your brain doesn't go, that's actually tea. That's actually cold tea in that glass. But it's, it looks good on screen sometimes. But it's never. I've sat in bars. I've sat with people drinking. I've talked to people drunk. I've never thought I want to get on that.
Yeah. And I saw a quote from you where you were saying you've become great friends with your demons. Does that mean you had to?
The ones I couldn't get rid of, or just I figured they're going to be around, so I may as well just put my arm around them.
Right. So you had to identify them.
Yeah. The some of the darkest, sort of most sort of deep set parts of myself, you know, they're the end for shifting. You know, those that depression is there, you know, and it's just a matter of being able to realize when it's coming on, not isolating myself, you know, which is what I would do. Sort of, I thought that, oh well, I don't want to be around people because I don't want them to see me like this. When it's actually the opposite that works. You move towards people when that comes on. You put yourself in other people's company that you trust, that have, you know, perhaps some sort of empathy, some sort of solidarity in that they maybe have these same traits, and you can be in that together. That's why, you know, what if this is all the love? It's like, you know, come on over here. You know what I mean? Just don't isolate yourself.
Yeah, right. So realizing that, and I believe meditation has been quite important.
Meditation and Qigong, are massive reasons why things have stabilized quite a lot, you know. And that's, again, been taught by my dear friend, the acupuncturist Gabrielle, who I wrote Heal Me about.
Yeah.
She saved my life.
After this short break, Gary talks about the secrets of songwriting and who he credits for helping him get where he is today. Welcome back to Humans of Music. Having co-written Snow Patrol's biggest hits and worked with artists such as Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift, Gary Lightbody clearly knows a thing or two about songwriting. So I wanted to know if he could tell me why certain songs connect with an audience more than others.
I really don't know. The ones I think that connect the most seem to be the simplest songs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they seem to be the ones that endure the longest. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have complexity. It just means that they are maybe, there's nothing in the way of the heart of the song. There's nothing in the way of the meaning. There's nothing arch about it. There's nothing, I think the cooler you're trying to be, the less you're going to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no blueprint, you know. I think if there was there perhaps is a blueprint in pop music, and that's not to deride pop music. It's just that there tends to be trends that happen that are then followed by people for as long as then somebody comes along and smashes that trend to pieces, and then that one's followed, you know, for a while.
Yeah.
But within guitar music or dance music or electro or even hip hop and things like that, it tends to be the songs that, you know, like speak their mind the best, and that can be delivered in whatever way feels right to the artist. You know, you don't have to follow a blueprint or a template, I think, if you're talking truth.
Yeah. When do you think you came to terms with that?
I don't know. We've always stumbled into everything, you know, like Run was written at a time when I had nothing, and I wasn't thinking about writing a song that would end up being a big hit. I was just thinking about writing a song. Chasing Cars was written in a night where I wrote 9 other songs. So I wasn't thinking about writing that either. I was just literally, it was all just coming out, and, you know, listening back on the next day, I was like, oh, geez, we've got something here. Actually, 5 of those songs ended up on Eyes Open. So
wow.
Our biggest record, half of it was written in a night.
Wow.
And so these things just tend to happen. Obviously, Wildness took a lot longer because I was going through a lot of other stuff as well. But once I got that stuff out of the way of myself, I got out of my own way. The lyrics started to flow, things started to flow. There was a flow to that record, even though it took 7 years. It actually really only took, you know, probably a year.
Right.
But still a long time for a record. But it wasn't like I was sitting there for 7 years trying to write. I started writing some songs in the darkness, like Life on Earth, that then it was a drawn out process, and that took like 5 years to write that song. But it was quite a few of those years that were that I wasn't fit for anything. So it wasn't like I was sitting every day trying to write the song. I was sitting every day probably in silence, staring at the screen or staring into space.
Yeah.
So I think it tends to be the songs that just sort of you let just appear. You know, don't fight a song.
Yeah.
And don't wrestle with it too hard either. Don't struggle too long with it, because you'll tend to sort of work yourself into a corner.
Yeah, sure. And Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Who would you give credit to for helping you get to this point in your career and life?
So many people. Jim Chancellor for taking a chance on us. I never even thought about that before. But there you go. It's right in the name. And Jazz Summers, again, somebody who took a chance on us. Jackknife Lee, who's been instrumental in our success. The very first album we did with him was a hit record, and we've had success ever since then. And so he was definitely somebody that changed our fortunes. Johnny McDade, all the guys in the band, I love them to bits, but Johnny McDade works harder than anybody that I know. Give him a lot of credit for just being the hardest working person that I've ever met in music and anything. Yeah, you know, all the rest of the guys, Johnny Quinn, Nathan Connolly, Paul Wilson, Tom Simpson's not in the band anymore, but he was a big part of our lives. I mean, everybody that has had a massive impact in our career has sort of, we've always maintained our friendships, the solid friendships. We've maintained loyal to people, and they've maintained been loyal to us. You know, it's like I'm sort of taking it from the U2 template in that only good people, no assholes. And, you know, of course you encounter assholes along the way, but they don't stick around that long because you don't let them.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing. We toured with U2 many times, and being on that tour, and I give them a lot of credit for helping us as well, for putting us on tour. And every single person, management, crew, catering, everybody on that tour was lovely to us. And band. That is, we've toured with bands, well, every band's smaller than them, but we've toured with bands smaller than them that wasn't the case.
Right.
You know, not that many bands. Most bands that we've toured with have been absolutely lovely, but when you see it on a smaller scale and you're like, what's going on here? You two are doing it on the biggest scale of all, and everybody is lovely. You're like, that's the way it needs to be.
Yeah, nice one. Gary, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening, and a big thanks also to Gary for his time and for being so open. This episode of Humans of Music was recorded at Forbes Street Studios in Woolloomooloo and engineered by Dominic Rizzo. The theme and incidental music were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Don't forget to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, feel free to share this amongst your friends and jump online and rate and review it. And remember, for all your music credits and to get the story behind the music, head to jaxsta.com. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thank you for listening.